This is June 29th, 1982, and I'm going to be interviewing Agnes Emenhiser. And Agnes, would you tell us your date of birth and place of birth?
Well, I was born just about a mile from here in a little town called Naples, Indiana. And my birth date is March the 27th, 1893.
All right, now can you tell me where your parents came from, or your grandparents?
Well, my mother's parents came, they were immigrants here from Besançon, France. They settled over the settlement north of here called Besançon. And my father's people came here from Pennsylvania, and they were, well, they weren't Pennsylvania Dutch, I guess. I don't know really what their ancestry was. My grandmother's name was Valiant, which is a French name. And they were both born in the United States, but my mother's parents were both born in France.
Did they tell you what it was like in this area when they came?
Well, my father's parents came before the Pennsylvania Railroad was built from Crestline to Fort Wayne. That was still in the process of construction when they came from Pennsylvania, and I think they came as far as Crestline, and I think they came by wagon train from Crestline to this area.
And were they farmers, all of your people?
Yeah, they were all farmers.
And you said you were born about a mile from here?
Yes, just about a mile from here.
In a town called Naples?
Yes.
Do you know much of the history of that town?
Well, it was named for one of the first settlers who came here early and established a sawmill in the town. His name was Louis Maple. They spelled it M-A-P-E-L, but the town got its name from that man, but the town's name has always been spelled M-A-P-L-E-S. And, well, he had a sawmill here, and in the early days, of course, this was all forest land here, and the settlers brought their logs in there and had them sawed into lumber and used it to build their houses and buildings. And there was a stave factory here, too, in early days. I guess it made barrel staves, as near as I know. That was about all there was here. There isn't that much here anymore. The town's getting smaller instead of getting larger.
Did your family build the house you were born in?
No. My father established a store in here, a general store here in Naples in 1892, and they bought an old residence here, and they lived in that, and that's where I was born. Then later they built a new house. I think they used a part of the old house. The kitchen part was old, and the main part they built new, and that was way back when, I can just barely remember when they put the new part up. I think I wasn't more than about 3 years old.
You grew up as a city girl?
Well, you couldn't hardly call it a city girl because it was just a little rural town, you know.
Most of the people were farmers.
Yes, I worked in the sawmill at the stave factory. And worked on the railroad, too, you know. They had 2 crews of maintenance workers on the railroad. One went east from Naples, the other worked west from Naples. Well, there was 6 or 7 men in each crew, so there was some of the people that used that as their occupation.
Is that stave factory still there?
No, it's been gone. I think I was more than 10 or 12 years old when they disbanded it.
And how about the grocery your father had?
Grocery?
Is it still there?
No, it was really a general store. It included groceries and hardware and fencing and things of that sort. And he took over the store in 1892, and he had it till about 1920. And in the meantime, these supermarkets got started, the Hoosier stores in this area, and he gradually just done away with the grocery. He was also the postmaster here. There was a post office here at Naples until about the time that he quit the store business. And that this area then was put on one of the rural routes out of Fort Wayne, and of course that did away with the Naples post office.
Now, you grew up then in Maples.
Yes, I lived there. I was married.
And where did you go to school? Was there a school right in Maples?
Yes, there was a school right there in Maples.
Is it still there?
Yes, but it's a residence now. The school that I first attended was on the north side of the railroad tracks. It was an old school, and nowadays they wouldn't allow them to have school in it because it had been condemned, but they had school in it for about a year after that, and a heavy windstorm came one day in October, and of course the building was old and it had been braced on the inside, so you know it wasn't in very good condition, and this windstorm knocked the belfry and the front end of the school down. Of course the bricks all fell, but nobody got hurt. We were inside. But after that, they just closed it up, and we didn't have any school until they got a new one built. And that was about 1900. Well, I didn't know the date, 1 or 2. I don't remember which. I know there was for a year and a half. The rest of that, well, all the rest of that term, that happened long in October. All the rest of that term until in January the next year, before they got the new school done. And that school is still there. Of course, it's since the bus lines run through and carry the children to these larger schools, why it stood empty for a while, and then somebody bought it and made a residence out of it and changed it a little. It was still in good condition as far as the building was concerned, but the basement, they had a basement. It was one of the first rural schools to have a furnace in it, and the drainage wasn't too good in Maples. It's low there, and the water got in the basement and made trouble, and they couldn't use the furnace. They just had to abandon the furnace and put a stove in there for a while, because the basement would fill up with water like a tub.
Oh, and what was school like?
Well, it was just a one-room school. The teacher had all the grades, and well, she did the best she could with all the pupils she had from the 8th grade. Some big boys, 15 or 16 years old, then still went to school. And she had the little folks and the bigger ones both. And she had her hands full, no playground equipment or nothing, you know. And so it was a lot different from the schools the children go to now.
Were most of the children from the little town of Maples?
Yes, the children who went there were all children who lived within walking distance of the school.
And would they go home for lunch?
No, they had to carry their lunch unless they lived right there in Naples.
Did they have recess?
Oh, yes, they had recess. Sometimes the teacher would go out with the children and play, and they always liked that when the teacher came along.
But did you always have women teachers?
Well, not all. Some were men teachers. Well, the best teacher I ever had was a man teacher. His name was David Freisinger. He was a wonderful teacher.
Do you remember what grade that would be?
Well, I think I was in about the third or fourth. He taught there 2 terms.
Of course, he would have been teaching all grades.
Oh, yes, he had all 8 grades to teach. But he had a good background, had a good educational background. And later he went into business. I think he was connected with an overall factory in Fort Wayne for a number of years. He's been gone, of course, for a long time. But I always thought a lot of him.
They have spelling bees?
Yes, sometimes.
What did they put the most emphasis on in education when you started the school? What were the main things that were taught?
Well, to the younger children, the beginners just got reading and writing and a little number work. Mm-hmm. But when you got up into the upper grades, they had about as much, well, not as much, but they had the main subjects they have now, like history and geography and physiology and arithmetic and reading and spelling, and I guess that was about all.
Then from the 8th grade, did you go on?
Did I go on from the 8th grade? Yes, well, I got kind of sidetracked when that school was condemned and closed down there, and I didn't get it. It was for a year and a half. I didn't get to go to school, you know. And then, too, my folks wouldn't start me in school till I was 7 because we had to cross the railroad track to get to the school. And they was afraid to let me do that when I was so young. So I was 16 before I got through the grade school. Then I went to Fort Wayne. Well, it was called Central High School on East Lois Street, and I graduated from there in 1913.
And you became a teacher?
Yes.
Did you need any more schooling other than that?
Yes, I went several summers to normal school. One summer at Winona and one summer at Angola, and I took home or night courses from the from, well, I don't know whether they were sponsored by Purdue or what, that you could take there in Fort Wayne, night courses, 2 or 3 nights a week. You could go and take certain subjects, and that added to your educational status,
Then how old were you when you started teaching?
I was 20.
And where did you start teaching?
Oh, I started in Madison Township, which is is the township that lies south of us here. We live right on the township line here. And I taught 4 years in Madison Township, and then from then on I taught here in Jefferson Township.
And when you first started, what kind of school was that?
Just a one-room rural school. Carried the water in if you wanted any to drink, and you carried the wood in, carried the ashes out.
Was it from September till spring? Was school in session from September until spring?
Yeah. So about 8, I think they call it 8 months, but it was a little more than that.
What did they do when it was a heavy snow?
Well, you just got through the best way you could.
You still had school?
Oh, yes. I don't think I ever, well, I can't really remember, I don't think I ever missed school because of snow. When it was too deep to go any other way, we walked. The last, let's see, the first 4 years when I taught here in Madison, I always walked was 2 miles. But I always walked back and forth to school. The children walked, and I did too.
Then did you teach, how long did you teach?
Well, from 1913 till I was married in 27.
Well, and would all of your teaching have been in one-room schools?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was all one-room schools.
It was quite a change.
Oh, I guess so. But I still think the one-room schools did more with the equipment and the know-how they had than they do now with all of the expense they have. There's something that you're closer to the children.
Yeah. Did you have troublemakers?
Oh, all school has some. Some are worse than others.
How did you handle it?
Well, you had to keep them in after school and give them a good talking to. Sometimes you'd have to consult their parents if you couldn't do anything else. Threatened to expel them if they didn't straighten up. I had trouble with them wanting to smoke, things like that.
Now, did they progress when they were ready or by years? When the child was ready to be promoted, did he go on right then, or did he have to wait until the end of the year?
No, he had to wait till the end of the year.
Did they?
Mm-hmm. And the ones that caused the trouble were those that didn't care a thing about school.
Well, that's probably true now, too.
I guess so. Well, it was altogether different than it is now. Now, I guess you send them to the principal if they don't behave. Then you had to pass your problems around yourself.
Was there such a thing as a principal?
No, I can't hear very well.
Was there such a thing as a principal?
Well, not a principal, no. There was a correction agent in Fort Wayne. You'd have to contact them if you expel them from school. They had to go and see them before they could get back in again. I never did that, but I did threaten a couple times.
Was it mostly boys that caused trouble? Was it?
Yeah.
Now, when you went to school, did you ever have homework?
Yes, lots of times. Because the teacher couldn't help you very much because her time during school. Sometimes they'd play games on the blackboard and things like that. You just had to do the best you could.
Did you dish out chores to your children, your pupils? Did they have chores to do?
In the school?
Uh-huh.
No, but a lot of times some of the better ones would help you a little bit. Like they sometimes, when the weather was nice, we had to go to a neighbor's to get water, to drink. And they'd sometimes offer to go and get a bucket of water. They'd take a stick and put it through the handle of the bucket, and then two of them would carry it so it didn't splash on their legs and feet.
How about wood for the stove?
Well, you carried it in.
The teacher did that? She had
Like you say, some of the better children would help you, but they weren't obliged to do that, So it was up to the teacher to do that. Later on, we had coal, which didn't require quite so much carrying as what the wood did,
Did it get pretty cold?
Oh, yes. It got plenty cold. Those schoolhouses were insulated like they are now. The windows in the school apartments, the walls were heavy, and that was all right. But the windows didn't have storm windows in or anything like that, and some of them were loose, and when it was cold, they'd rattle, and the wind would come in all around them. Then the ones that sat next to the wall sometimes had to move in closer to the stove to keep warm.
How about mud?
Mud?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there was plenty of that in the spring.
Did your husband come from this area?
He came from near Hoagland, which is about 5 miles south of here.
And you met him in school?
No, I met him on the dance floor.
Oh, did you? They danced more, didn't they?
Yes, I think they did.
Uh-huh.
There was a hall. Well, there were several places. But over here along the Johnson Highway, there was a small settlement there, and there was a hall there that they used for dances. Wedding dances, and they use it for other gatherings, like sometimes for reunions or receptions of some kind or other, And when it wasn't used for any of those things, most every Saturday night they had a public dance.
What was that, square dancing?
Square dancing, mostly, yes. It was fun.
And everyone turned out? Did it draw quite a...
Oh, yes. The young people didn't have much of a place to go, and they didn't have movies like you do now, But they always turned out. It was always a good crowd.
Were you married? Did you wait a long time after you first met him before you got married?
A couple of years.
A couple of years. Were you going to school at that time?
No, I was teaching there.
You were teaching. And then did you settle down in Naples after you were married?
We were married in October, and we expected to live on this farm, which then belonged to my father. And the people who were in here, they couldn't, they had to move to another farm, and the moving process generally took place around the 1st of March. The time limits on the rental of a farm generally ended around the 1st of March, and they had to move on another farm before we could move in here. And the people who lived on the farm that they wanted to move into the wife got sick with some kind of a terminal illness, and they couldn't move in there until she either got better or passed away. And so it was till April, I believe. They should have been out in March. They didn't get out for some time in April. Until that time, we lived in with my father, but as soon as the family was out here, then we moved in here. We've been here ever since. About 55 years, I guess. We've been married 55 years in October, and I think we moved in here about the 1st of May or something after we were married.
Did you have a big wedding?
No, we didn't have any wedding at all. My mother had passed away, and then those days they didn't. When you got married, if you had a wedding, you had it in your home. There wasn't facilities like there is now, And with my mother gone, my sister and I were both working. We didn't plan on any wedding. We took a wedding trip instead.
Where was that trip?
What?
Where was your trip?
To Ohio. Into Ohio. I had relatives down there, and I did too. We took it. We went to Niagara. Did we go to Niagara Falls? I can't remember. No, I don't believe we did. We went to see several things that we were interested in Ohio, and then we stopped at different relatives for a short time, maybe just for half a day or so. Went to Cleveland, and we were only gone less than a week.
Then you came back to housekeeping. Was there electricity in here when you moved in? No electricity?
No electricity, no running water. The home I left over there in Naples, my father had just built that in 25, and we were married in 27, and it had all modern convenience, and so it was quite a lot when I moved over here.
I guess so. How long was it before you got modern conveniences?
How far?
How long before you got electricity?
Oh, they had in Naples, let's see, they finished the house in 25. I just don't remember for sure when they got that electric line into Naples. But they'd had it, I think, did we have that, or did we had a Delco plant in the old house? I can't remember whether we still had that when they built the new house or not. It hadn't been too long before that they had an electric line from New Haven out to Naples.
What was a Delco like?
Well, it was a plant that had large batteries, and it had an engine. I think it was an engine run with gasoline, I guess.
Oh.
And that motor charged those batteries. I think it was about 12 big batteries, and that furnished the light for the house. But if you were going to have company or have lights on all over the house, well, you had to run the plant at the same time, or it'd pull the batteries down pretty much. But it was much handier than the way it was before.
Your water was outside when you moved in here?
Yes. Yes, we didn't have any conveniences here. You had to wash on the board.
Heat the water?
Yes.
Was that a lot like your mother had it? Was that a lot like your mother had it?
Yes. She had kind of a hard life too, you know.
Can you remember much of her housekeeping?
Yes.
What was it like?
Well, she didn't have the conveniences we have now. A lot of things that we think we couldn't do without, well, she had to do without. There were 6 children of us. And when you wash on the board for 6 children, why, you know you're married.
I guess. She made her own soap?
I made my own soap for a long time. Yes, I think she did too. But to bake bread.
Well, when you were a small child, people didn't go to the grocery, did they?
Well, yes, they went to the grocery. Maybe they'd go once a week or something like that and get flour and sugar and coffee and that sort of stuff. They didn't buy green vegetables and fresh meat and things every day like they do now. They couldn't, you know. And then people didn't have refrigeration in their homes. Of course, in the winter that didn't bother much, but in the summer, you know, you can't use fresh meat unless you have a place to keep it, you know.
How did she preserve food?
Canned it mostly and dried it. We used to dry apples and dry corn, and then we canned a lot of food. And then when they butchered, why, they'd cure the meat, you know, the hams and the bacon and things, they'd cure that. And some of it we canned. I know we used to can sausage and things. I'd help her with it. But people in those days, especially the poor women, they had it pretty rough.
Did she sew everything?
Oh, yes. Then they made most of our clothes, you know. Later on, it was different. But when I was small, so I was pretty well grown up, when you wanted a new dress, Mother bought a pattern and some material. And
was that hand sewing?
No, we had sewing machines, but they weren't electric, of course.
She did her own baking?
Oh, yes. I can remember when she used to bake. We had a big square pan that just stood in the oven, and she'd put 6 loaves of bread in that pan, you know. Nowadays, you think you've got to bake each loaf separately if you do bake. And I can remember those big loaves puffed out over the sides of the pan, you know, and they were good.
Oh, was that a wood stove?
Yes, yes, a wood stove.
How did she keep the bread? Or didn't she?
No, we ate it up. I didn't have any trouble keeping it. She'd have to bake a couple times a week, you know.
Pies and cakes and cookies?
Yes. All that sort of stuff, coffee cakes.
How about milk?
Well, of course, we always had our own milk supply, and if we had more milk than we used, whatever turned sour, we'd make cottage cheese out of it, you know. Sometimes sour milk pancakes, and part of it was used up as much as possible. But you know, we didn't have any basement. We just had a little upground cellar, I guess you'd call it. It was a lot cooler than the house, you know. We could use that, but it wouldn't take the place of the refrigeration you have today.
No. They could keep fruit and things like that?
Keep what?
Fruit, like apples? Could they keep them in the...
Apples?
Uh-huh.
Well, we generally kept them in an out. We had what they called a summer kitchen, and it was it could be closed up so that until it got pretty cold, things wouldn't freeze out there. We'd keep apples out there until it got too cold. Then after that, well, you just didn't have much of a place to keep them.
So they dried them?
Yes, we always dried apples.
Well, what was the summer kitchen?
Well, in the summer, why, the house would be so hot, you know, and the summer kitchen was just a building that was close to the house. Ours had a walk between the house, an up-ground walk between the house and the summer kitchen. And you had your cook stove out in the summer kitchen, did your cooking out there, but you brought the food into the house, into the dining room to eat it.
It was still hot in the summer kitchen, but it kept...
Oh, yes, but the house didn't get the other way. The house got hot all over, you know. And it really kept the rest of the house much cooler.
I see. I always wondered what a summer kitchen, what the purpose was.
Yes. And the canning and all that we did out in the summer kitchen, you know, through the summer. And we didn't hardly use the cook stove in the house at all during hot weather. But maybe more running back and forth, you know, between the two buildings.
How was canning done?
Well, we did that out in the summer kitchen.
But was it done open kettle?
Yes, mostly open kettle. And later on, I don't know how long that was. Just when my sister Gladys went to high school, she took domestic science, and that was at the time when they started to use this pressure. No, I don't know when they had pressure cooking, but this hot water bath cooking, you know, when you put the fruit or whatever it was in cans and then immersed it in hot water and cooked it so long, you know. And they use that a good deal, especially for fruits, you know, things.
Do you still can?
Oh, I canned 175 quarts of peaches last year.
How do you do it now?
Well, I do mostly with we freeze some too. We've got a freezer, we freeze some, but we do it with a hot water bath.
You don't have a pressure canner?
Yes, I have a pressure canner, but I don't like to can. If you cook them the least bit too much, then they're mushy and just all cooked to pieces. And I was always more or less afraid of them that the steam should get too high. You know, you could have a dangerous burn. So I used it some, but not mostly for meats, when you can chicken or something like that. But mostly I used a hot water bath. And I like to can that way.
You're a busy lady.
Well, my husband helped me. We had our own peaches, so we wouldn't have canned that many. But we had a number of trees here, and last year they were just loaded, and this year they're not going to have a one on, I don't believe.
Really?
I guess the early frost killed the blossoms or prevented them from pollinizing or something.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But I've got a lot left. I've got about 90 quarts of peaches left over, so if I don't get any this year, I'll have plenty without canning any extra ones.
That's good. Do you have a garden?
Oh, yes, we've got a garden.
A big garden?
Well, fairly big. Big for two people.
You grow most of your own food?
Mostly.
And do you garden now the way that your mother gardened?
Well, of course, we have better ways of cultivating it, you know. Nowadays they have these cultivators that used to be you had to use a hoe if you want to get rid of the weeds.
Right.
And this way, well, my husband takes care of the garden. I don't do anything with it except sometimes go out and pick some things for the table, but he does all the work in the garden. I'm getting too old to do that. See, I'll soon be 90 years old.
Does he plant his garden by the sign? No?
No, he plants it in the ground.
He always has a good garden too, I suppose.
Well, mostly. Sometimes this year we have a few things. We had some trouble with our tomato plants. Something got into them when they were getting nicely started. Ate the tops off of them, and so they came out again. I wanted to throw them out and put some more different plants in here. I said, oh, no, I said, they'll come anyway, but mix them later, you know.
How about, was the church a central part of the family when you were growing up?
Did they what?
Did you go to church a lot? Was it church?
Well, there was a church there in Maples, a little Methodist church. And as kids, we went there to Sunday school. But I never really joined church till I got married, and then I joined the church that my husband, the English Lutheran Church. I joined that. We go to the Trinity English Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne. That's where our children were baptized and confirmed.
Do you remember, did your mother have a lot of folk cures when you were sick, or when anybody in the family was sick? What did she do?
Well, if it wasn't anything too serious, she doctored us ourselves. I remember when you get a heavy cold, she'd smear our chest with turpentine and lard, put a piece of flannel over it. Well, it was different than it is now. If we cut our foot on it, she'd clean the wound out and put a piece of fat meat on it.
Did the turpentine do the trick?
Well, it helped. I'll tell you, it helped. Now, you can just say what you please. Doctors would probably laugh at it, but it did help.
A lot of those old folk cures worked.
Yeah, they weren't like the antibiotics they have today, but they were the best they could get at that time, you know.
And did you have a family?
I had 2 sons.
2 sons?
Mm-hmm.
And they both lived close, do they?
Well, the one son lives a mile over here at the edge of Naples. The other son lives 8 miles northeast of here. Well, he lives on a farm. The one that lives here in Naples, he owns about 100 acres of farmland, but he rents that to somebody else. And he helps farm the farm we have here, too. He rents part of that. But, you know, he has a rural mail carrier job, and so, you know, that way he can't put very much time in on the farm.
It's nice that they're close.
Yes, it is. I don't know what to do without them.
When you had your 2 sons, did you have them at home?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
And your
In
mother?
those days, you didn't have money to go to the hospital.
Your mother had her family at
Yes.
home.
My oldest son was born in 28, and the next one, Keith, was born in 31. And, well, in 28, you know, that was just about a year before the Depression. The market broke in 29, you know, and everything went flat, you know, and it stayed that way for several years. People didn't have money to spend like they do now.
Were those real hard times?
Well, yes, they were.
Did you manage to always have food?
Oh, yes, we grew most of our own food, and we were conservative and didn't spend money for things that we didn't really need, you know. And I made our clothes of mine, and at least the everyday clothes for the 2 boys. We didn't spend much, and that way we came through the Depression without going backwards, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But we wouldn't have if we hadn't been very conservative on our spending. Because grain and things that we depended on for our income was worth so little. I can remember when corn was, I don't know, I guess it was around 10 cents a bushel or something like that. It was just almost nothing. Some farmers burned it instead of buying coal, so, you know.
I never knew that.
Yes.
Did it work? Would it burn and keep a house warm?
Well, yes, I guess it did. They got by with it anyway. Maybe burn coal at night and use that in the daytime. I don't really know. We didn't do that. We had plenty of wood here. There was big woods on this farm and a lot of down timber that could be used, you know, for firewood. And we always had plenty of wood to burn.
Those were hard times.
Oh, I guess so.
Oh, how about the war? Now, World War I. Do you remember much of that?
Do I remember
The times?
times there?
Uh-huh.
Yes, I do.
And was that, were those hard times?
Well, no, the war forced prices up, you know. And farm prices that had been low were pushed up after the war because the demand was so much greater, you know. And prices were high then, during the war.
In World War II?
Well, World War II, I don't think that made such an impact as World War I did. But it made a difference too, you know. So many of the men went to the army, then other people took their jobs, you know, in the factories and things. And many farmers that try to work their farms in the daytime and maybe work the second trick in a factory. Going into work in the middle of the afternoon and working until 11 o'clock and getting up early the next morning. And
That was pretty common, though, wasn't it?
It was funny. Everybody was worried about the outcome of their people that was in the service, too, you know. You never knew what you were going to hear from one day to the next.
That's right. Were any of your family in the service?
No, my husband was too young for the First World War, and I guess you'd say he was too old for the Second. And then, to the exempted farmers to a certain degree, you know. And the boys, Keith, he didn't come into the service regulations, but Donald was in the Army for 2 years or better.
When you just started out housekeeping and did farming, was it all by hand?
Farming?
Uh-huh.
You mean with horses?
Yes. No machinery.
Well, yes. Was it the first year we was married or the second year? We were only married not more than a year or so when Harry got a tractor.
Oh.
I can't remember if, I think maybe the first year we didn't have any, but we got a tractor, and that took the heavy farming, the plowing, which took so long, you know, and was hard for the horses too. They did all of that with the tractor, but now they do everything with the tractors, you know, planting and everything, but then...
The tractor was probably a big investment then,
Oh,
wasn't it?
yes, it was. Big investment. Just today, yet. So you can buy a home with what a tractor costs for now. Costs now.
It's quite a change in farming.
Oh, yes, I should say so.
Now, when did you first learn about extension homemakers?
No, before I was married, they formed an extension club, Homemakers Club here. And my mother belonged for about a year, but she took sick. I don't think she ever got to go to too many meetings. And then I joined them after she passed away.
About what year would that have been? What year would that have been?
Oh, well, about 23 or something like that, 22.
They weren't called extension homemaker clubs then.
Well, I don't know what they were called, really. No, they didn't call them extension club.
But it was all farm women?
Yes, in this area it was. Well, I think it was all over for quite a while. And then later on, the city people were taken in on, they enlarged the number of projects and subjects and things so that it would interest city people as well as country folks. But for a number of years, it was only people here in the country that belonged. I belonged for, I think I've been between 55 and 60 years. I'm the oldest member, I think, in the county because the last time they had a achievement day, you know, they recognized the people who had belonged so many years. I was the only one that, the last time I was the only one that had belonged for 50 years in the county. But they never recognized the 55-year members. I'm past 55 years. I belong more than 55 years now, but they didn't recognize the ones who belong 55 years. I don't know why.
Was that always in the same club? Is that club still, what club is that?
It's the Happy Harmony Club.
Have club meetings changed?
Oh, yes.
How was it when you first went?
The subjects they were interested in then were altogether different from what now. When I first belonged, the first project they had that I can remember was making dress forms.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on there was projects of other kinds. The dress forms was what was in the boat where I belonged, or when I first belonged. And the meetings were on subjects altogether different, you know, than they are now. They have roundtable discussions on butchering and flashing dinners and things like that you don't know anything about now.
Thrashing dinners was a big thing, wasn't it?
Yes, I guess they were.
Did they schedule the thrashing so that you knew ahead of time when they'd be at your farm?
Well, you knew, but not too long ahead, because if it rained or something, you know, and they couldn't thrash for a day or even a half a day, well, then that made the schedule, you know, you got them later than you would if it could thrash every day. Thrashing depended on the weather. If it wasn't dry and sunny, they couldn't thrash. And so you never were sure, you know, but you knew generally about when you were going to have them.
And then while the men were out in the fields, the women were cooking the meal?
The women cooked the meal, you say?
Uh-huh.
Yes, the women, whoever had the thrashing crew at her house, she was responsible for getting the dinner and supper too sometimes. Quite often they'd thrash late and you'd have for supper.
How many would that be that you'd be cooking for?
Well, from 12 to 15.
And would you be the only one doing the cooking, or would the other one?
I had to get help, you know, I had to get a neighbor lady or a relative or somebody to help you. It was too much for one.
I remember seeing the threshers out in the field.
Yeah.
Did they just move from one farm to the next and on down the road?
Well, they had their schedule, you know. They knew who they had to thrash for, and they took them as in order, you know.
Well, who had the thrashing machine?
Well, some farmer would buy a rig, and he'd make it his business all through the thrashing, the harvest season, to thrash the first one and then another. And then they charged so much a bushel, or I think they charged by the bushel. And, well, they thrash oats and wheat. And sometimes some farmers had rye or barley, but not many, mostly oats and wheat. And the wheat always was thrashed first, and the oats came later.
The club ladies didn't get together and cook.
For thrashers, I mean? No, I don't think so, not for thrashing. They, whenever somebody'd have a death in the family, why, the club ladies used to always, we had a committee that was, I believe they called it the Helping Hand Committee, and whenever anyone had need of help, why, it was up to that committee to see that they came in and helped them, you know. If there was a death in the family, each one of the club members generally sent in some prepared food, you know, like cakes or something like that, or salads that would help take care of the food problem.
That hasn't changed, has it?
No, that's still that way.
Yeah, that's real nice.
Yes, it is, because then there's always a lot of extra details the family has to take care of, and sometimes there'll be relatives come from some distance away, and they'll be there, you know, at their home for a day or so, and it was a big help when they had somebody to take over like that.
Mm-hmm. Does your club meet all day?
All day? Not very much. They used to have 3 or 4 all-day meetings, but now we generally have an all-day meeting at Christmas time, the Christmas meeting. And, well, sometimes we have one in between two. Sometimes we have a picnic during the summer, and that would be an all-day meeting. Then we go to some park or something, you know. But that's about all. Years ago, they had more all-day meetings. I don't know why.
Were the lessons, did they last longer?
The lessons?
Like you talked about butchering, and that would take longer to give that lesson, wouldn't it?
Yes. However, I don't believe we ever had a demonstration lesson on butchering. That was mostly just the ones who made up the program for the club, you know, would include that.
Was it about the same as it is now, about sending someone to take the lesson and bringing it back to the club?
Yes, it was about like it is now.
Did you have agents that would come out to the meeting and give lessons?
A few times, not very often.
Was there a time when the men and women both went to lessons at Extension?
No, I don't think so.
Did you go to Purdue?
No.
You never went to Homemakers conference?
Oh, no, I never went to a conference. I went to, you know, they have well, what do they call that every year in August?
The camp?
Huh?
Women's camp?
Yes, I went to that several times when I was younger. It was nice. I liked to go.
It is nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.